This episode is brought to you by DirecTV Stream. DirecTV Stream is your home for basketball this season because it's the best way to catch the games you won't want to miss. And with the DirecTV Stream Sports Hub, you can follow your favorite teams and track scores all in one place, which makes keeping up with the biggest plays, rivalries, and wins this season a slam dunk. So get your sports together and get your TV together at DirecTV.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package.
This episode is brought to you by EA Sports NHL 23. The ice is wide open and good times await in NHL 23. New gameplay strats let you run on-ice tactics like never before. Customize your players, teams, and tournaments for the richest online multiplayer experiences yet. And now with mixed women's and men's lineups in Hockey Ultimate Team, we're all ready to play. So grab your friends, gear up, and make history in NHL 23. Search NHL 23 to find out more.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Ducks Confidential Podcast. I am James Kreppe, the Oregon Ducks beat reporter for the Oregonian and Oregon Live. Welcoming you back to another edition of the program. We're coming off a bye week. Obviously, we're not going to be getting too much into game review since there wasn't one, both for Oregon or for UCLA, the top 10 opponent and marquee matchup for this weekend ahead. So we'll be all about taking a look ahead to the matchup, to some of the things to pay attention to, and obviously, yes, plenty of the hoopla around it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about all that. I mean, look, it's fun. It's fun for fans. It's fun and part of what makes college football unique is that that part of what creates the environment and the excitement around a big game weekend is things as, you know, seemingly, I won't say small exactly, but that don't necessarily have anything to do with the game as terms of where a pregame show is. That's fun. And what's the harm in that kind of thing? Hey, I'm not saying I'm going to be there at 4:00 in the morning to see the college game day set, but for, especially for college students, when it's on your campus, when you're a student, you have finite opportunities for that. Over the span of 4 or 5 years. You just do. And when game day hasn't been to Eugene since 2018, and, so for a lot of the students who are here, it's obviously a great opportunity, regardless of what the weather looks like. And I hope that the forecast changes for folks, both whether you're going to game day or you're just going to the game or both or whatever. I hope it certainly changes as of recording on Tuesday afternoon, that Saturday ends up holding out a little bit better, by way of that. But it creates some fun and excitement. It does. For as great as the NFL is, nobody's losing their minds on a week-to-week basis among NFL fans in terms of whether or not the pregame show or what studio show is coming to their stadium. I mean, it's not a thing. It's part of the fabric of college football. Obviously, it's quite the environment. And obviously the folks at ESPN and College Game, they do great work. So hopefully, an opportunity for Oregon to showcase itself as it was for UCLA last year in this game, when they were on UCLA's campus and setting up, for the Rose Bowl, at the Rose Bowl, for the game between the Ducks and the Bruins last year. So marquee opportunity. Hard to believe that this is only the 18th top 10 conference game in the Pac-12/Pac-10's history in the last 36 years. And that is really hard to believe, quite honestly. When you consider and remember, exactly how good, Oregon's been for the last 20 years, when you consider how good Stanford has been for the last 10, 15 years, when you consider how good USC was, obviously in the early 2000s, that alone makes it just hard to fathom. And Washington's had its moments and plenty of others. But point is you just go, how in the world have there only been that many opportunities, that many big games in conference play in this conference for, like I say, 35, 36 years? It's really hard to believe, but it is. So having said all that, whether it's part of the game day environment, whether it's just the build up ahead of a game, like I say, that's part of the fun. and embrace it, enjoy it. Look, we're not that far removed from a time where fans couldn't even be at stadiums. Fans couldn't even go to games. We're 2 years removed from when the season had no competitive integrity. Now you're back. Stadiums are packed. Tremendous environments all across the country. And here you're going to have, it's been a sold-out game well before they learned about College Game Day coming to Eugene. So embrace that we're all going to have an opportunity, whether you're going to the game or watching the game from home, to see something that you don't see every day in this league. You just don't. I wish you saw it more frequently, but you don't. So embrace that you're seeing, a top 10 matchup. Yeah, there's some fun storylines. Yeah, there's going to be some great on-field clashes between strengths on strengths and those things, and we'll get into those a little bit, and we'll chat about it with UCLA beat reporter James H. Williams of the Orange County Register, who will be kind enough to join us here as well, and we'll get his perspective on things for Saturday's matchup. But to go over briefly, like I say, and set up for you, and to set up for a conversation with James Williams, some of the things that are intriguing to me in this game in particular. First and foremost, like all big games, just like, frankly, you see in the NFL, this is a battle of quarterbacks. This is a battle of two experienced, veteran, longtime starters. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, for many, many years now, all at UCLA. Bo Nix having transferred from Auburn to Oregon, and both having great seasons so far, showing the value of experience. In DTR's case, the value of experience and continuity in one system. In Nix's case, the value of experience and some familiarity with the system that he was joining and coming out to Oregon. When you have games where two quarterbacks who are playing at a really, really high level are going at it, they're not playing each other, as we all know. But nevertheless, that is part of, that's part of how a game is built, is when two quarterbacks are really, really good, really accurate, really efficient. And in this case, both have the ability, obviously, to pose really big threats with their mobility and ability to extend plays, ability to really hurt a defense in the run game. That's a lot. So, they may not be playing each other and defending against each other, but how they play is de facto playing each other in a big way. It's always easy to say in these kind of matchups, well, whichever of the two quarterbacks has the better night. Maybe, particularly if the forecast does hold true and conditions stink. Maybe who makes a mistake, ball security, fumble, any number of factors could be something to that effect. Sure. You have a battle of strengths both ways, and that these are two of the best running offenses and two of the best running defenses in the league. Clash of strengths. Again, when you have a great matchup and a top 10 matchup, you want to see something like that. Well, you're going to have an opportunity to see it. I think, personally, that Oregon's offensive line is such a competitive advantage against any opposing front seven that it plays for the rest of the season. And ever since the season opener against Georgia, and obviously they more than held their own in that game as an offensive line unit, even at 49-3. The offensive line was not the issue that day. That until and unless a Pac-12 opponent shows it is capable of consistently applying pressure, getting to Nix, creating holes, mismatches, and confusion along Oregon's front, until you're shown otherwise, you're going to have a hard time believing it. And look, UCLA at times was effective last year. At times was effective. But remember, Oregon's offensive line, while also very good last year, also was down some players in this game last year. Alex Forsythe, chief among them. So until and unless an opponent actually shows and goes out and proves that they got the better of that unit, I think you have to give the competitive advantage still to the Ducks' offensive line. So even on a battle of strengths on strengths, frankly, Oregon's offense, Oregon's running game has proven more, even against inferior competition and really bad run defenses. And they've played 3 really bad. I'm not even counting Eastern Washington. They have played, of their 5 FCS opponents, 3 of them have really bad run defenses. I mean, really bad. Like bottom 10, bottom 15 in the country bad. So if you didn't have that success, though, against vastly inferior competition, then we wouldn't be talking about how they have such an advantage. So they went out and they proved against really inferior competition. They went out and did well against solid and really good competition against Georgia. Again, in moving the ball, we know what the score was. That now when they play a really good, statistically, defensive front 7, who statistically has backed up some things, but frankly, has not played an elite running game. It hasn't. Utah is not as good as it was a year ago in running the football. And now, that's putting aside any issues there with wherever Tavion Thomas is and his status at the moment. Talking about when they played them, week and a half ago. I wouldn't go by that. Washington, stop. So UCLA, as good as their run defense has been, again, not just on paper or numbers or any which other thing, it's going by what we've seen. What we've seen against competition, good, bad, or otherwise. How do these actually match up? I think the advantage goes to Oregon. Well, when you factor in weather, when you factor in if the weather really stinks, if throwing the football is going to be a challenge, well, I think even in a battle of strengths, Oregon's strength is stronger than UCLA's on that side of the ball. Now, conversely, I think UCLA is going to be able to run the ball with some success and effectiveness. I think Zach Charbonnet is the best running back that Oregon will play the rest of the way, regardless, again, of what goes on with Tavion Thomas or not. But by the time they play Utah, that's neither here nor there. Regardless, I think Charbonnet is the best running back they're going to play. I think, frankly, if his offensive line was even better, he'd be even better, and that's saying something. I think he is a really tough test and a tough guy to bring down. Runs through contact, welcomes contact, fights for extra yards. That's really tough. And when you combine him with a big and mobile quarterback like DTR is, that's why that offense in part is really, really good. You pair those two together, that there's a reason why they're each getting at least some hype for the Heisman Trophy right now. And Saturday will be a factor in how all parties are perceived going forward in that regard, collectively as teams and as individuals in the case of DTR and Charbonnet in particular, and Nix for that matter. So I think they'll have some success there. But just as we're talking about who UCLA faced on one side of the ball, well, frankly, they haven't faced a not just front 7, but particularly linebacking core as good as Oregon's. And even though Oregon hasn't necessarily faced a individual running back as successful and as good as Charbonnet, combined with the quarterback in particular, they did play some pretty good running backs against Georgia. And again, put that aside, for that overall outcome aside. Ever since then, they've played much better. Their run defense is obviously really, really, really good. I do think that even in the battle of strengths on strengths, as it's shaping up heading into it, I think Oregon has an advantage on both sides. Even if it's slight, I think it has an advantage going in the battle of strengths on strengths. Now, in the battle of strengths on weaknesses, that's where I actually think the game will ultimately be decided. The strengths on strengths is fun. The strengths on strengths is, that's where a lot of hay is going to get made. Let's not kid ourselves. But I'm not sure that either run game's success is ultimately going to be so dramatic or so vast by comparison to the other that it ultimately determines the game. I think the thing that will determine the game is the strength of each team against the relative weakness of the other. And UCLA is one of the most efficient and effective offenses at completing on first down, moving the ball on first down, and a really high degree of accuracy, moving the sticks, all those things. Well, you combine that with a third down offense that's also extremely good. And that's a lot. That's a lot to try to stop. You got two really good players. They help lead an offense that moves the ball very effectively, not just in general, but staying on schedule, staying ahead of the sticks, staying out of second and long, and then getting into third and manageable and third and short and converting at a really, really high rate on third down. Well, what's the number one problem facing Oregon's defense? For as good as they are in the run game, their pass defense is not good statistically. Even at times where they've improved, even at times where individually they have some really good performances, they have not had a collective great performance. And in part, and mainly, it is because they cannot get off the field on third down. Can't do it. They have struggled all season, not just from the 9 of 10 against Georgia. And I throw aside the FCS stuff. I don't look at those statistics one way or the other. They have not done well at getting off the field on third down, including in distances to where statistically you are supposed to be at an advantage. That, not only is that not sustainable, and we talked about this again on the podcast last week even, those are things that you can't sustain success while doing that. It's not possible. You cannot be a team who plays for conference championships or more and are unable to get off the field on third down at the level that Oregon is presently struggling to do so. It doesn't work. They are 129th in third down defense out of 131 FBS teams at just a hair over 50%. In other words, the majority of the time opponents are converting. You aren't going to win. You're not going to win against better teams doing that. And you're not just playing a top 10 team. You're not just playing a team with two Heisman contenders at the midpoint of the season. You aren't just playing a fifth-year starting quarterback and a veteran running back. You're doing all those things, and yes, you're doing it at home, but you're doing it against an offense that is absolutely, I don't want to say unstoppable and oversell this here, but they are playing extremely well. They are in sync with each other. Clearly, their connection on offense from a play caller to quarterback with the running back and the O-line all together with members of the receiving corps, not much isn't going really well. UCLA has a lot going for it offensively right now. Again, it's staying ahead of the chains. It's converting. They're fourth in the country in third down conversions. And okay, even against a comparatively speaking, not that strong a schedule. Well, if you just take the 3 games that UCLA has played against FBS teams with winning records right now. So throw out half the schedule for all, okay, fine. Well, they're 5th in the country in third down conversions in that case. And 3 of the 4 teams in front of them only have a 1-game sample size to go off of based on the criteria that it be only against FBS teams with winning records. And that's Ohio State, Georgia, South Alabama, and North Carolina are the 4 teams in front of UCLA on third down conversion rate against FBS teams with winning records. And some of the other teams in the top 10, Clemson, Ole Miss, Michigan, BYU, Washington. That's a pretty good area of the Monopoly board to be on. High rate on third down conversion against winning FBS teams. Funny how that correlates to teams with really good records as a whole. The vast majority of the time. Yeah. When you keep the sticks moving and you have success, not just against really bad teams, but against good ones, yeah, you're going to win a lot of football games. We don't have to overcomplicate this. This one really could be simple. It could be as simple as, all right, strength on strength, who has a slight edge? Who has a slight edge? Oh, well, ball security is always at a premium. And then if the weather stinks, and I hope it doesn't, but if it does, how does that factor in? There will be all kinds of fun individual matchups. It should be a great environment at Autzen Stadium, regardless of what the weather ends up holding. I don't think very much will put a damper on it. I don't think any weather situation thrown this way will impact the generally ruckus environment for this one. It's a tremendous opportunity both ways. And before we get to our conversation with James Williams of the Orange County Register to get into the Bruins, I say it's a big opportunity. For Oregon, a win, and you get to 6-1, and you're 4-0 in the league. And yes, you still have some big games ahead by way of there's the Washington game and a rivalry game. Yes, there's Utah and what Utah did to Oregon and its season last year. Except we don't know exactly what's going on with Tavion Thomas right now, but worry about that by the time you play him. It's going back to Berkeley even a week from now, and hey, that's always a tougher game than it necessarily should be. Going to Berkeley 2 years ago wasn't exactly a pleasant experience for Oregon, even if most of the team is different by comparison, and even if most of Cal's roster is different as well. It's a game that's just always played more competitively than necessary. So you can't look past anything. If you get to 6-1 and you're 4-0 in league play. Lose? All right. Lose, and at 5-2 and 3-1. Well, at that point, you can completely rule out the playoff. Not that I think that the playoff was a huge percentage at the point, but a top 10 win would certainly improve whatever chances do exist for sure. But a second loss at that point, you can call it a day on that. But you're still very much alive to make it to the conference championship game, and if you're doing that, then you have an opportunity to play your way into the Rose Bowl. So a win, and there's a ton of upside, and yes, whatever faint chances there still are for a playoff opportunity are alive and may get quite the shot in the arm, proverbially speaking. Lose, and it's not devastating to the conference championship hopes necessarily, but obviously, we know where Ducks fans are going to fall on the on the zero sum nature of things. For UCLA, win, and UCLA will be at a height as a football program that it hasn't seen in forever, in eons, since they will have been at that point, with only one truly daunting game left on its schedule, and the matchup with USC. Because the rest of the way, it's entirely possible that UCLA may not play a team that's going to a bowl game other than USC for the remainder of the regular season before a trip to Las Vegas. Lose, and UCLA could still very much make it to Vegas. And I can't absolutely say they'd be out of the playoff with one loss. But again, because of the same situation, all right, well, lose to Oregon, but what if they actually played through, beat USC, got to the Pac-12 championship game at 11-1, and avenged that loss to get to 12-1? Would they really be left out? I just don't know if the relative quality of UCLA's schedule and quality of wins at that point will stand the test necessarily. But again, worry about that at a later date. For now, a marquee matchup of literally historic proportions for the league, particularly where you got to remember still this is college football. And yeah, the majority of people in the stadium are not college age by way of fans, but we're alums. Do remember what it once was to be college age and be in the student section. And for those who are of that age and who have that experience, you hope for a great college football Saturday. It's part of what makes all of this fun, the pageantry and all the rest of it on the outside. And heck, for the players on the field, even if they can, plenty have talked about this week, they acknowledge the reality, but you don't overburden yourself with the reality. But playing in these kinds of matchups is exactly what you aspire for and hope for as a player. Well, now it's here. It's a great opportunity on Saturday. It should be, again, a great environment regardless of the weather. And I say again, I hope that it holds, that the forecast does not hold true, and that the expression holds true rather than the forecast at the moment. But with all that said, we'll get into and certainly get into the game more with James Williams here of the Orange County Register in a moment. For those of you who already do subscribe to the podcast, we thank you. For those who don't, remember to do so. Subscribe, like, 5-star review, comment, all that fine stuff. It helps more people to find the podcast. Appreciate everybody who already does. Make sure to follow James Williams on Twitter at JHW Reporter, and we will catch up after our conversation with James. We'll obviously go over next week this game, one way or the other by way of outcome, and set up for what will be a fun game the following week in Berkeley as well. But now we will chat with UCLA beat reporter for the Orange County Register, James H. Williams. Well, we welcome to this week's edition of the program UCLA beat reporter for the Orange County Register, Mr. James H. Williams, who you can follow on Twitter, as always, at JHW Reporter. Welcome to the show, sir.
James, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to talk to you. How are you doing?
Good. Likewise, man. It's been a minute, and certainly looking forward to, obviously, as all the fans are, it's pretty fun in our line of work when there's a top 10 matchup like this, because, it doesn't happen every day, and it doesn't happen every day in the Pac-12. So looking forward to going over this one a little bit with you and getting into it ahead of this one, which is obviously going to be a pretty big game. Obviously extremely meaningful for both sides. And when you add in game day and all the other fun and festivities around it, should make for quite the environment at Autzen Stadium on Saturday. For Ducks fans who haven't necessarily watched every waking moment of UCLA so far this season, James, give the really broad picture perspective in that how is it that a team that lost its three best receivers off of an 8-4 season, one of them to Oregon, no less, in Chase Cota, and lost several other pretty good players, a lot of defenders, couple of, I believe at least one offensive lineman as well.
Two.
Yeah, there you go. How is it that a team that lost all that, albeit, yes, with a returning, fifth-year starter quarterback, returning really good running back, certainly, UCLA has some talent there. But how is it that a team that lost what it lost off an 8-4 season has gotten off to a 6-0 start and is more productive, more efficient, more accurate, and has two players who are getting some early Heisman hype here at this point? How is it that they've done it?
You know what, James? I think about this often, and I still kind of don't fully understand how they're doing it. I think maybe the easy answer is Jerry Azzanero's gone. I mean, that might be. I mean, again, I'm not sure. I mean, Justin Fry was the offensive coordinator. He's no longer here. He's at Ohio State. Some people were saying that Chip Kelly was still calling the plays then anyways. So I don't know how much of that has necessarily changed. I mean, he didn't hire an offensive coordinator, so he's calling his own plays. You have a fifth-year quarterback with Dorian Thompson-Robinson, Zach Charbonnet, as you mentioned, two guys that, continue to make a name for themselves. But, yeah, they lost some offensive linemen. I think one of them got drafted. One signed as undrafted free agent, and then the other one, I'm not entirely sure if he got signed anywhere after the fact. But, yeah, so they lost three linemen, actually, and I think they're good there just because they continue to have a hockey rotation of some sort. But yeah, it's the receivers too. And the thing I've just kind of been chalking that up to is one, Dorian's kind of taking this approach of it's his pre-rookie season. Obviously there was some consideration of going into the NFL draft. He decided not to and returned for this fifth year. And I think he's definitely benefited by returning. And again, so his mindset of this just being a pre-rookie season, in a way it almost is, because you don't have Greg Dulcich there, your tight end. You don't have Kyle Phillips. Obviously, we saw what Greg is able to do in the NFL now that he's activated on the Broncos roster, but then also just the things Kyle Phillips has been doing during the preseason and leading up to this season with the Titans. I mean, obviously those were some key pieces there. So, it's just a clean slate for him too, in terms of who he's throwing the ball to. Maybe it's not as predictable because it was kind of like you're either throwing it to Greg or you're throwing it to Kyle, or you're running the ball with Charbonnet, or Dorian's running on his own. Outside of that, it's kind of like, Chase Cota was the third option, but there was such a significant drop from Greg and Kyle to Chase that, I mean, it's just, I don't know. He's just building chemistry with everyone, and everyone's kind of on an equal playing field, if that makes sense. I mean, it's not like he hated the other guys, but it was just, he leaned on his two targets. Obviously, I think he was the same recruiting class as Kyle. Greg was practically his roommate for most of the time they were here together. So the chemistry was like anything he had with any of the other guys. But now it's just a clean slate for everybody, and he's throwing the ball around to just about everybody. And it's kind of impressive and refreshing, at least from a reporting standpoint, to be writing some different names.
Defensively, as you mentioned, they made the change from Mazzanero, which was something that UCLA fans are certainly really eager to see happen
for years,
and probably felt was rather overdue. So they make a change. Okay, it's helped lead to some improved results, and it also helps to have an influx of transfers on both sides of the ball. But on the defensive side, to have Latu, who I understand, he was basically, for all intents and purposes, ruled, medically retired from Washington, and to come in and continue his career, and not just continue it, but be one of the more disruptive players in the Pac-12 so far this season. It's not even about, is he exceeding expectation? I don't know what anybody's expectations would have been in the first place.
You're right.
It's what has allowed for a player to do this in the manner in which he's been doing it, and how they use him, and that he's not just an edge rusher on one side and that's it. If you watch his highlight film, and obviously you've seen him throughout the whole season, but for fans who can even just pull up the highlight film, I mean, he's getting sacks from all over the defensive line. He may be an outside guy, but they've lined him up basically over the center at times. They'll put him just about anywhere.
Yeah, I started to laugh there when you said it, because you're right. I had no expectation from him. I mean, I just felt anything from him would have been good. I didn't expect him to be the key guy that he's turned out to be. And that's just because when you hear a guy's medically retired, you just, you kind of know what the injury is. I believe it was a neck injury, but you just don't really know what you're getting. And I think even for the players in some of these situations, they don't really know what they're capable of to a degree. Yeah, I mean, sure. He has said, he's changed some things in his life, and just continue to work as if every week was a game week leading up to this over like the last 2 years, he said. But until you get into live action, you don't really know what's going to happen. But for him, it's been pretty impressive. I think a lot of that, credit to Chip Kelly gave credit the other day to Coach Malloy, who I believe is coaching at Washington for some time and was working with Latu. Might have been his position coach if I remember correctly, but obviously those guys are familiar together. Malloy comes over, and Latu follows him over through the portal. And then also the Murphy twins, who we could probably talk about here in a minute as well, transferring in from North Texas. Chip Kelly credited Malloy for getting those guys over here to UCLA as well. So just a lot of what they have in that kind of up front there on defense is a credit to Malloy. So again, just with Latu, it's been pretty impressive. In a way, I kind of credit him or I can kind of view him as this year's Charbonnet, where you get a guy out of the portal. People kind of are excited about him, but you just don't really know till you see him, and you start to see him, and he's everything and then some of what you thought he was or could be. So Lachi's been kind of a nice surprise because again, it was just kind of, where's he going to fit in? How's it going to work? I heard the name come up, but we just never really even talked to him until like 2 or 3 weeks into the season. He wasn't showing up on the 2 deep. I think he's still not listed on the 2 deep at all. I just kind of thought out of respect you'd put him on the 2 deep somewhere, but maybe that's to your point where, he's playing all over the place. He's not really listed anywhere at a particular spot. It's just based on how they line up, who they're playing against from 1 week to another. So again, Latu continues to be a nice surprise. I'm blinking on the number off the top of my head, but I know he's second in the country in sacks, or at least tied. I think it's like 6.5, if I remember correctly. So he's doing some things, and he's been a big part of what they're doing on that defense.
Indeed. How is it that they've gotten offensively not just better, but the clear and obvious area that they've really, really moved up? And it's credit to Dorian Thompson-Robinson, credit to Chip Kelly in particular, in that their first down efficiency and their first down accuracy in the passing game is, and it's off the charts. I mean, you got to call it what it is. It's absolutely outrageous. I mean, they are one of the best first down offenses, but passing first down offenses in particular in the country. I mean, they're completing 78.7% of their passes on first down, which is obviously highest in the league, but as I say, they're legitimately also one of the highest in the country at that. I mean, they're the number 2 only to Michigan in completion percentage on first down, and they've thrown 10 touchdowns with no interceptions. I mean, other teams that are kind of in that echelon right now this season are Michigan, Tennessee, TCU. Oregon's completion percentage on first down is very high. It's just that they have 4 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. Unfortunately for the Ducks, and they're still one of the highest in top 10 on first down completion percentage. So just to give fans an idea, that's a really important situational split that, everybody talks about, coaches, it's coach speak. Stay on schedule, stay ahead of the chains. Well, UCLA is staying on schedule and they're staying ahead of the chains, and that's how they're undefeated. How is it that they're doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I just think the chemistry that just comes with being a 5th-year guy in Dorian, right? And I think he's leading it because, again, as we mentioned, they're changing parts, but it all just starts with Dorian. And a lot of people would have thought, and I mean, maybe to some regard he still is, Zach Charbonnet would have been the one who's kind of the Heisman guy. But right now, all the buzz is just on DTR. And I just think his ability to lead the offense, he's familiar with the offense, and they just know what they're going to do. Like, I don't know. It's hard to say. It still kind of shocks me, and I've been covering the team for a few years. I mean, the offense was, was scoring points last year and stuff and moving the ball at will, it seems sometimes. But no, I'm good, thank you. But yeah, I mean, they're just on another level. I mean, I wish I had a better answer for you, but I think it's just all kind of the chemistry that Dorian and Chip Kelly just kind of have at this point. Because again, they lost so many significant pieces on that offense that I thought they were going to take a step back. And I mean, this is just an offense in general where you didn't even think you were going to get Charbonnet and DTR back this year. It was a surprise that you got them back this year when I thought for sure they were both moving on, especially Charbonnet being a second, third round guy in the NFL draft in this past April.
Last couple things for you, James, in terms of setting up for this weekend in particular. Which is, I mean, we are halfway through the season. Obviously, this is a major matchup. And I think both sides, both fan bases can say if their own team and then of the other team, quite frankly, they feel really good, but they may not know everything. UCLA fans, I'm sure, have to be ecstatic if they're at 6-0.
Oh, yeah.
And no matter what happens this weekend, still feel like they have a chance to play for a conference championship and maybe more. And Oregon fans at 5-1, quite honestly, that's exactly, we were talking about it last go around on the podcast here, but saying that's exactly where they're supposed to be. So I don't think anybody has to talk about like they're overachieving or something. No, they're doing exactly what they're supposed to do from a record standpoint. But that said, I don't think everybody has all the answers just yet, because which is the real UCLA team? Is the real UCLA team the team that struggled with South Alabama, who, yes, has gone on to have a successful season and is probably going to do pretty well in its league, but is nevertheless a Sun Belt school? Or are they the team that had a really impressive showing against Utah? Is Oregon the team that got its doors blown off in the season opener? Or is Oregon the team that has been much more efficient, much more explosive, and much less turnover prone in the game since, albeit with a still improving defense? I think both sides, like I say, can pose those questions. So I ask you, who do you think the real UCLA team is, and which version is going to be showing up at Autzen Stadium on Saturday?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's, again, something I've just been thinking about, because especially during that non-conference gauntlet, right? No, just the non-conference games, they kind of struggled a little bit, it looked like. And even the way they came out in that Bowling Green game, I mean, yeah, it was 100 degrees, yada, yada, but Bobo's doing punt returns and stuff, and it's bouncing off his chest and different things, and it just didn't look good. And I think they were just kind of trying to figure each other out still, again, when you have some different transfers, some new pieces, and something, I mean, them playing Washington on a Friday night, James, you probably know this too, it's just Pac-12 Friday night games. That's just a recipe for craziness, along the same lines of what you'll get on a Pac-12 After Dark game. So I didn't know what to expect. I mean, I thought maybe, Washington was either going to blow them out or what. You really don't know what to expect. And I thought that defense was going to get tested, and they kind of held their own against Michael Penix Jr. and stuff. And, you hear going into that game, they haven't been Michael Penix hasn't been sacked, and number one offense, and, it didn't faze them. They just played their game as if it was South Alabama the week before. Obviously, it looked a little bit more impressive just in terms of who they played against. But, yeah, I mean, part of me wonders how much different they would be. I mean, we'll see how they are after the bye week. That's probably the biggest concern for me, is they were just rolling so good with so much momentum, and they were playing those first two games against ranked opponents back to back. Are they gonna rest on their laurels here a little bit now that they've had time to sit and think about it, much like they did between that LSU and Fresno State game last year, or are they going to keep going? So I think we'll have a better idea after that. But it seems headed in a positive direction, in a direction they haven't seen since I started covering the team in 2019. That's for sure.
What are some of the individual matchups you're looking forward to seeing on Saturday, James? What are some of the this player against that player, this running back against that one, this receiver against this corner kind of stuff? What are some of the the chess match, the game within the game stuff? What are some of the things that you're looking at right now that you're kind of looking forward to seeing?
One, just for me, one would just kind of be Chase Cota, because it's Chase Cota, and we covered him out here for a couple of years now. But for me, also another local guy, Upland High alum, Justin Flo. I'd love to see him get involved on a play when Charbonnet has the ball. I think that would be kind of fun to see. But yeah, I mean, the secondary, obviously they lost a lot of guys in the secondary for UCLA, and I thought that would be a struggle for them. They even had a guy switch. They had a senior transfer, Azizi Hearn, come in from Wyoming. It was started the first couple games, and they made him a second stringer, and they moved up a guy that they had come in out of high school, and John Humphrey. So they for all the hype on them bringing transfers in, they went to one of their own guys that they've developed, and he's fit in nicely. And the secondary just continues to roll. They're almost looking better than they did last year when they had experienced guys that they had developed in years prior, and those guys moved on into the league. So the secondary's been well. I'd love to see how they do against some of these receivers, but obviously how Oregon can stop the run game. Obviously Sewell and Flo against just DTR and Charbonnet, I think, is a big one for me. I'd ask you the same question, James, just, especially for a guy like Bobo with the length that he has as a receiver. He was they had Clark Phillips in this Utah game, and even Clark Phillips didn't necessarily have answers for what they did in the passing game. What does Oregon have to try and stop a guy like Bobo?
Yeah, I think they have not so far. They have not just completely dedicated Christian Gonzalez to one guy and one guy only in a game. And I think there's something to be said for that, because ultimately if you do that, then you really become so predictable that you know an opposing coordinator can ultimately try to scheme around what you're doing. They were pretty close to that at times against Arizona, where they put him on Jacob Cowing a good bit, but he did not cover Cowing exclusively, and both in general in terms of who was covering Cowing, and also in terms of who he covered throughout the night and when he was targeted, who he was covering. It was a pretty good mix, and I say that to say Cowing is obviously really productive, but he's a small slot receiver, and that's not what Jake Bobo is.
Right.
But he did cover T-Mac, and he's also 6'5". And I asked Dan Lanning about that on Monday night about, hey, how do you think Christian handled the size differential? And because he's a pretty big corner, but no corner is 6'5", and how that may or may not translate, and understanding that the offenses are different. That's a given. But talking more to the size aspect, and like most coaches are going to say, yeah, he had some good, he had some bad, had some areas that he did pretty well, he had some areas he could improve. Okay, so that's one that's interesting. I think Gonzalez against really whoever the best receiver is on the opposing team any which time, and in this case, look, it's Bobo by production, but somebody has to cover Allen and on every play too, and just because it may be Gonzalez frequently on one, quite frankly, I could draw up a plan that's perfectly legitimate that the majority of the time he's on Allen, because of size, because their other corner in Trequez Bridges is 6'3" and has a big wingspan, and that may make sense as well. I think they'll obviously rotate looks and those sorts of things, but intrigued by that, certainly. Like you say, I think I don't think this one has to be too complicated. I think to your point, talking about, yes, Noah Sewell and Justin Flo in particular, when they're downhill against Charbonnet, but more than them, really the entire front seven, really the core of the front seven from Oregon's defense. This is a strength on strength kind of a deal for both teams, by way of they're the two strongest run teams, they're the two strongest run defenses in the conference, and not just in general in the conference. Oh, it's inflated or something. No, their numbers really stack up really, really nicely. So I think on that side in particular, because Charbonnet is a big guy to get down, and you're talking about not just Sewell and Flo, but also Jackson LeDuc and Keith Brown and Jeff Bassa, linebacker. This is a pretty deep inside linebacker core for Oregon, and they're going to be tested, yes, by a big running back, but conversely, he's going to be tested by a very big, strong, and fast linebacking core that's probably the best that they're going to face this season. So I think both ways, the strength on strength aspect is intriguing on the ground, and then when you talk about in the air, whether it's receiver matchups or just in general, what the quarterback on each side against, less so about an individual player in the secondary, more so, quite honestly, the opposing defensive coordinator. And what they're trying to do to confuse the fifth-year guy, or the fourth-year guy in the case of Bo Nix, the experienced senior multi-year starting quarterback. I think that's the matchup from the quarterback versus somebody perspective. Both are pretty much dual threat guys for all intents and purposes, or at least mobile enough to be, major threats there and pose enough of a threat to where, it certainly stretches the defense. So really intrigued by all of it, to be honest. I think the one that they have now, having said all that, that's intriguing. That's fun to watch for me inside the game. I think the ones that are ultimately going to decide it, that really will will be the factors that really swing the game. I'm not sure that, other than, if a quarterback has a ton of turnovers necessarily, that I'm not sure that the outcome will swing on any of those. I think those will just be really good back and forths at times.
Mm-hmm.
I think ultimately, the thing that'll shift it is Oregon's offensive line is so far and away the best in this league and one of the best in the country. And UCLA has been, again, really effective defensively, but they haven't faced an offensive line like this. They just haven't.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oregon has played perfectly legitimate defenses. They played Georgia in particular. Now, they've also played some really bad run defenses, in fairness. But they've been good, and they've held up against anybody. On their schedule, by way of Georgia, by way of, all right, BYU's run numbers are bad, but they have had some moments. But Washington State has generated a lot of disruption in the backfield. They didn't allow anything. I don't care who you play. I don't care how bad Arizona is. Not allowing a tackle for loss is historic in nature. So doing those things, hey, if you didn't do it against bad competition, you're not going to do it against good competition. Well, they dominated bad competition. They played well against really good competition. Well, now they're going to play really good competition again, who hasn't faced tests as strong as they are. Mm-hmm. I think that could sway everything one way in particular. Conversely, I think the Oregon secondary in particular, because of its challenges, frankly, throughout the season, particularly on third down, absolutely unequivocally has to play better in coverage, has to get better disruption and pressure in the front seven in order to get off the field on third down. Because otherwise, UCLA, just I'm pointing out Oregon's strength on offense, that UCLA has not had to face something as effective and whatnot. UCLA is the best third down offense in this conference and one of the best in the country. And they're the best first down offense in this conference and one of the best in the country. And Oregon can't get off the field on third down. So awfully hard, those are two things of like, all right, we can talk about strength on strength is really intriguing and that's going to be fun to watch. Yes, it is. It's also going to be the deciding factor, strength on weakness. That's the area that I think is going to be the thing that swings this game. But yeah, that's why they play it. Last thing, James. To the really big picture of it all. And obviously, we've talked about this on radio over the years. But now that they're at 6-0, so regardless of what happened Saturday, but give me an idea of what is the perspective, what is the big picture in Westwood these days of if Sunday morning this team is 7-0 and the only thing with a major challenge left on their schedule is USC. Are they planning for, are people no longer hedging? Are they just outright buying their tickets to Las Vegas at that point? And planning the trip for the Pac-12 championship game and, booking their trips for, the Fiesta Bowl and, a trip to the playoff, or, what's the feeling at 7-0? And conversely, if they drop to 6-1, how big is the disappointment, or are they, hey, it's 6-1, you're still alive and things are still okay?
I mean, you probably have some people who already bought their tickets out here just because of how excited they are, but no, maybe it'll bring some of them down to reality a little bit if they do take a loss. But I think like even just for me, like my whole thing for this, this was the toughest stretch of the schedule, obviously, Washington, Utah, Oregon. And for me, it was like, hey, win two of these games, 2 of the 3 games. And I mean, that's something, you're heading in the right direction. They've already won 2 games now. We'll see what happens with this third game. If they win this third game, I mean, they passed whatever expectation I had for them. Obviously fans are always going to want the best for their team and assume they're going to go undefeated, but I mean, they'll probably be a little disappointed because of the undefeated season will then be over. But at the same time, I think there's still a lot ahead of them. The one thing I've always kind of stressed to fans on my podcast or on Twitter or whatever is just, hey, they're playing well against these highly ranked teams or just these ranked teams, and that's good and that's different and that's something that normally hasn't happened over the last 3 or 4 years. But it's what are you going to do and how are you going to respond to some of these other teams later on in the season, especially when you get on a roll of hey, we can beat this team. Hey, we can beat this team. I mean, because if it's going to be anything like what you did in the non-conference play, that's not necessarily a great thing because you let South Alabama hang around. Now, Is South Alabama better than Colorado and stuff? Sure. I mean, they already played Colorado, but just the point being is don't start playing down to opponents after the fact. Don't take your foot off the gas pedal. Keep going like you're playing Oregon or Washington or Utah every week, even if it is Cal. Obviously, USC is still a tough test in there, but how are they going to respond to USC considering the opponent they had before and after, right? Like I think that's the biggest thing for me is, you won 2 of these 3 games already. Now, how is the team going to respond and do going forward? Because the most UCLA thing ever, and I have to be careful saying this because I'm here on the campus of UCLA saying this around students, and I know they can hear me. But are they going to do the most UCLA thing ever and stumble against a team they should beat easily? And I think that's where the disappointment would set in if you start getting some losses like that.
So you're saying UCLA is susceptible to pulling a Washington State and Couging it? yeah, Couging it. Yeah, pretty much. I mean, to be honest, it's like I just wouldn't be surprised by it. To be honest, like I just feel like undefeated. I mean, just considering the seasons I've seen covering this team, undefeated. I mean, I've seen some of the Dorian and Antonio Maffei, Mo Osling, those guys that have been here either while Jim Mora was here or right after Jim Mora left, was, hey, we started the season 0-5, and now we're 6-0, and for them, it's kind of like they've had better seasons in the first half of this season than they've had, just in some of their other seasons combined. So they're off to a good start, and I think with guys like Dorian playing with the passion that he's playing with and stuff, he just wants to win, and he's even said that in post game. It's like, I'm not trying to stop and be happy with being number 11, now number 9 in the country and stuff. He wants to be number 1, and he's not going to settle for anything less. So that's the attitude they need to have, and hopefully that's the attitude they have going forward when it gets to Arizona State and Cal and stuff like that. I do have a question or two for you, if you don't mind, James. Sure.
I heard it's supposed to be raining and potential thunderstorms out there, and that's just going off the weather report. What are you guys hearing out there locally, and how do you think that can factor into some of what we see in the style play for both of these two teams if rain is a factor?
I was going to say, well, as we all know, I far be it from me to predict that the weather forecast will be correct at the moment. But
Right.
yes, it isn't. I can look at the forecast just as good as the next guy and say, yeah, it doesn't look good. But again, Oregon fans listening will absolutely let me have it if I don't say that, it does never rain in Autzen Stadium. So,
Okay.
but having said that, no, look, I mean, if the forecast holds, I'm not sure that it will put that proclamation to the test, to say the least. So what will that do? What will it mean? Hey, it's equal both ways. But obviously when you're talking about two offenses who are really explosive, and Dan Lanning pointed that out on Monday, talking about how both Oregon and UCLA are both plus 31 when you're talking about plays generated of 10 plus yards versus plays allowed of 10 plus yards. They're both at a plus 31 margin. Now, yes, both of them get a lot of that on the ground, but part of what has made Oregon so much more of an explosive offense this year is that they're doing it in the air. Needless to say, it gets a lot harder to do that when the conditions stink. And having said that, in my mind, I think in the battle of strength on strength, even if it's saying it's pretty much, even if you basically just start from the original position of, all right, well, therefore it's equal both ways. Both are really run heavy. Both would go that way, and both would have a hard time and some varying degrees of success against really stout run defenses. Right. But go back to my other point before of, well, yeah, I'm still going to say, until somebody proves it otherwise, that Oregon's offensive line is at a competitive advantage over any defensive front seven it plays all season, during the regular season at least. So in that case, even on a battle of strength on strength, I give the edge to Oregon in that capacity. If the rain makes it to where passing is just, brutal, and really, really difficult. then in a battle of run games, I still take Oregon's run game. Even if my choice of running back in a proverbial fantasy draft starts with Charbonnet.
Right.
If I had Charbonnet behind Oregon's offensive line, that's a different story. And don't, for any UCLA fan out there listening, as I'm sure James will be retweeting this and sharing this and whatnot when we get around to it, don't take it as a shot at UCLA's offensive line. I'm just speaking more to the strength of how good Oregon's offensive line is. So if that holds, if that's the case, obviously, again, I don't think anything will put a damper on what the environment inside the stadium will be from a crowd standpoint. I think this game, having already been sold out well before it became top 10, well before it was about college game day, all that, I don't think any condition would make for the in-stadium environment to be anything less than absolutely raucous. But I do think that, particularly for those who are going to go to game day that morning, if it's raining all night through the broadcast, that those people, I can only hope, will go home and change and not walk in completely waterlogged after that many hours, because dang, that would stink. But other than that, truly, I think the environment will be great from a crowd and environment standpoint. But in terms of environment by way of literally, the weather and whatnot, if the forecast holds, it would put a relative damper on things in that sense. But ultimately, this is at a game of this level and meaning. I think it would take a lot more than rain to necessarily knock it off its axis too much. I mean, there's too much on the line here.
And I think too that it's a good point. There's obviously so many factors and different things, but that's another thing. Like, UCLA has only played one road game against Colorado. Colorado, they have a decent crowd and stuff, but I mean, the on-field play, is obviously it's a different level when you're playing with Oregon. But now you're playing with the crowd. Austin Stadium is considered one of the loudest in the country, and it's just how is UCLA going to do in that? I think that's like one of the bigger questions, right? That's going to be one of the biggest things. Obviously, they're 6-0. A lot of that's been at home. People say the non-conference schedule hasn't been all that, but not only do you have a tough opponent, a ranked opponent, but you're doing it out of your comfort zone for whatever that's worth, considering everything that is the crowd sometimes at the Rose Bowl. But
also, frankly, as strange as it might be, if the conditions are as bad as the forecast presently is as of Tuesday afternoon here, if there is an advantage to that, again, both teams have to play in it. No kidding. But I'm saying if there's an advantage at all, beyond whatever you may think in terms of X versus Y by way of players and matchups, to your point, I think that favors Oregon ever so slightly, because, again, everyone's going to be standing around for hours. If they're standing around in the rain, if they're standing around getting wet, if it's cooler, if it's windy, whatever, okay. Well, if you're on the offensive line or on the offense for UCLA, and you already got a brutal enough matchup in the first place, but you got capacity standing room only exceeding 54,000, that always sounds louder than that anyway, going ballistic. And, this isn't a normal fall day in terms of conditions. This isn't warm. This isn't brisk. This is just plain crummy, if that's what if it holds true. Yeah, I got to give the slight edge to the home situation, because their offense doesn't have to deal with the wall of sound. So to add to it, you already feel kind of off, and then naturally you have home field advantage and those things too. So now, having said that, I say all that to say, and last season when Oregon went on the road to Washington and the conditions were absolutely atrocious, except the one thing was that Washington's defense was not good against the run at all. It wasn't good entering, and it was worse leaving. And Oregon's offensive line was still at a competitive advantage walking in, and they were even a bigger advantage walking out. So that's the one different factor, is it's like, oh, well, in that case, Washington would have had it. No, because Washington's defense wasn't any good against the run. Here, UCLA still has something going for it in that regard. But obviously, I think both of us very much hoping, for our own sakes, let alone for the players on the field that and the fans in the stands, that the forecast changes rapidly. Because I even into the covering of a press box, I would prefer if it's not raining all day long. I would prefer very much for it to be a little bit better conditions than that.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think another thing real quick too is like there just hasn't been a whole lot of injuries, so I'm kind of curious to know what the injury report looks like for you guys. But just over here for UCLA, there hasn't been a whole lot of injuries. Usually, you're a team. The Bruins are a team that are happy for a bye week, and because it gives them time to rest up on some guys or get some guys back. There hasn't been anyone who's been out for a significant period of time. The offense hasn't had to change because Dorian's been out, and hopefully I'm not jinxing this for anybody, honestly, but yeah, it's just like everyone's been healthy, and that's been the biggest part of them being able to click and just be consistent. Is they've all been there. The same guys that were there from game one are still there, still playing. No major injuries, which is kind of been surprising in that regard.
Yeah, and that's been largely true for Oregon as well. I say largely in that, so they've had a couple of defensive linemen who were further down the depth chart who've missed the whole season so far with foot injuries, but and they haven't been back at practice yet. But at least one of them has been out of the walking boot they were in earlier on. But again, those were going to be at best kind of rotational players at this point, regardless. Not that means that their injuries are less, burdensome for the young men. But we're not talking about starters necessarily. There is one, starting interior defensive lineman in Popo Amavai who is expected to miss the season and could seek an additional year of eligibility from the NCAA. He's one of those 6th-year senior, 5th-year seniors, 6th-year senior guys who could look for a 7th year potentially. So that is the most significant in that regard because it's going to be a season long. A starting offensive lineman in Stephen Jones, who's missed 4 games because of a foot injury. He's not going to be back this weekend, but looks like he could be returning later on in the season. They missed a couple of guys against Arizona, but beyond Jones. But it sounds like safety Brian Addison will be good to go this week. So they've gotten healthier after the bye week, as both sides would. And again, grand scheme of things, certainly not dismissing the injuries to Jones and Amavai in particular, but grand scheme of things, that's a pretty good health report and injury report for the season where, all right, unfortunately, yes, one player, particularly a guy who's expecting this to be a senior season. All right, well, he may get a chance to come back, even if that wasn't originally the plan. Unfortunate, but particularly a position that they added a lot of depth in the offseason, brought in transfers and things, bolstered it up with Taki Taimani from Washington, with Casey Rogers and Jordan Riley from Nebraska. They had a lot of depth there to where that's already a talented and deep group, and they've been really effective. Offensive line, Jones was one of the 5 guys that returned. They had basically 7 of their top 8 guys return. They've been certainly able to overcome his injury the last month. And again, he may they hope that he returns before the end of the season. So long story short, not exactly, completely unscathed, but, compared to other times where you go, a team is totally snake bitten by injuries and you just go like, my goodness, they're down 3 linemen. They're down, 2 guys in the secondary. They're down, the leading receiver or something. I mean, that's just not the case. So they have been, fortunate, yes, to some extent, but not completely unscathed either. But yeah, in a pretty fortuitous position as a whole. So, which again, that's not only what everyone wants, because who wants to wish injuries on anybody, but it's what everyone wants because you not only want that, as a fan of your team out there, I would hope, but who wants to see the other team diminished? You want your team, for fans who are out there, you want your team to win, right. But you also want your team's win to be as meaningful as possible, which means the opponent being at their absolute best.
That's right.
That's how you get to relish in it. You don't get to relish in it when you go, yeah, but that team was without. Then that doesn't work. That's how fans start their online arguments and message board debates and Twitter space arguments about, oh well, that win didn't matter because that team was without so and so.
Exactly.
Well, no, you don't want to hear that. No excuses. So yeah, hopefully we will have no excuses by Saturday evening, James. Hopefully we will both get the right stories, no matter what the outcome is on the field, which I know neither one of us particularly has certainly a sway or vested interest by way of who wins and who loses. But regardless, hopefully we both get the right stories that don't focus too much on the weather, don't mention injuries. One team wins, one team loses, and hopefully, a good time had by all kind of thing. But ultimately just just to see an excellent football game. Again, it's hard to believe that this is only the 18th top 10 Pac-12 conference matchup in the last 36 years, but it is. So with that in mind, like, truly appreciate what it is that we're going to get to see, and hope that it lives up to that, because it should. And they, fans deserve it. The programs deserve it. The players deserve it. Yeah. Let's hope that, the conference needs it.
Yes,
quite
they
frankly.
do.
So,
Yes, they do.
let's hope that it delivers on that.
No, I agree. I couldn't say it any better myself there. Good point.
Well, again, for folks who don't follow him already, he is James H. Williams of the Orange County Register. Again, make sure to follow him on Twitter at JHW Reporter. Check out his stuff at the OC Register. Again, does a great job covering the Bruins. Appreciate you as always, James, and look forward to seeing you again.
No worries. Thanks for having me. Always appreciate it, James. You have a good one and be safe.